Hello and welcome to another issue of Better Minneapolis. Today I'm here with Matt Pelikan, who is a candidate for Hennepin County Attorney, a race that doesn't always get as much attention as it should, but it's very important. A lot of community matters, public safety, accountability, go through his office or this office, right now Mary Moriarty's office. Hennepin County has the most cities in the state. There's 44 additional cities to Minneapolis, and in addition, there's 34 different police departments. So Matt brings a background as a litigator with 14 years of experience and has been making the case that we need fresh leadership and a different approach. We're going to get into some specifics today, talking about things like clearance rates, charging policies, Operation Metro Surge, and the ongoing question of how you build trust between prosecutors and police and also holding them accountable. So, welcome.
Thank you.
What would you like to add to that introduction?
That was a good overview, I think, especially about how important this office is at this time for our community. As a little bit of background, I'm Matt Pelikan. I'm a lifelong Minnesotan. I grew up in Northfield with Paul Wellstone as my hometown hero. I went to St. Olaf College. And then my first career was working professionally in politics and trying to make a difference in our society, helping progressive candidates here in Minnesota and around the country. And then I came back here for law school, and I've been a litigator for 14 years, as you mentioned. I clerked on the Minnesota Supreme Court and have really worked hard on cases to help my clients, certainly, and where I can to make a difference in our society. And I think the through line through all of this is trying to have accountability and hold powerful interests accountable. It's been one of the things that motivated me to get involved in politics all the way back in high school in Northfield. And I'm happy to be here today.
So that's one thing about this office that I guess have learned through doing these interviews is that consumer safety, I think, is also kind of under your purview. Is that right for this office? And there's more things than just prosecuting people who break into homes and things like that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it's always important to think about the formal roles of the office, and I think that's what your question is about. So, the county attorney, first and foremost, is the chief prosecutor for Hennepin County in charge of prosecuting crimes, and people think about that as violent crime, property crime, but it covers a wide range of things. And I think one of the things that came up last week that we've been talking about is elder abuse and people who are taking advantage of elderly residents. But there's a gamut there of criminal activity that the office prosecutes and that the people in Hennepin County have to be protected from. The office also works in advising the county on a range of matters. So it's in some ways a general counsel office for certain of the county functions. And then there are things like family law, child support, making sure that people are following their obligations to support their families when a court orders them to do so. So there's like the formal role of the office, but I think it's really important to think about the informal role too. I talk about it like hard and soft power or responsibilities, because a lot of what people talk about for this office, and I think it's important, are not just the formal powers, the charges that you bring, the management style. It's what are you doing as a voice in this community for public safety, for criminal justice, to bring stakeholders together. What are you doing to advance some of those causes for reform and equality in our society, the rule of law? And those don't fit neatly into one box of formal responsibilities, but I think they're a really important part of the office, and I think it's a really important part of what the different candidates can bring and the different visions.
So what made you decide to run, and why is this particular office important to you?
Yeah, well, I've been a downtown resident for about 20 years. I live right by the river in downtown. I've lived here primarily since college. My husband and I moved both of our parents downtown. So public safety and livability in our community are not abstract ideas for me. That is my neighborhood. It's my walk to work. It's where we have our family. We want to raise a family. So I care a lot about that issue. And I saw Mary, who I supported 4 years ago, because I believe we have to continue reforming the system. We have to continue trying to innovate, to find more fairness and equality in the system. But she's had some stumbles. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that we do two things at once. We have a county attorney who has sound judgment and is able to actually build a coalition for public safety and cares about the quality of life and livability and public safety throughout the community, but we have to keep the project of reform alive. There isn't a book on the shelf with instructions of how you do prosecution. I think it's a mistake if we look at some of the concerns around public safety in the community, some of the, in my view, mistakes that Mary has made, and say, okay, we're going to throw out the project of reform and we're going to go back to some previous system, some way that we have conducted prosecution in the county. And I saw the conversation around the next phase of that office kind of being torn in those two camps, either doubling down on the reform efforts that Mary has had that I don't think have gone in the right direction. I don't think it's been a success even for reform in the last 3.5 years. That's one vision. And then the other vision is let's just go back to, experienced prosecution. And I think that system really failed us. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk more about that, I hope. And so I wanted to run for this office because I believe in livability. And I think progressive communities have to be thriving, safe communities. But I think we have to do it in a way that keeps the reform project alive and we continue to innovate and progress towards a more just and fair society.
Yeah, if I understand kind of your direction, we keep doing this thing where it's a pendulum swing, right? Where it's like we're going to go all in on, say, reform and going after bad cops and stuff, and then people get kind of upset with that, and then it swings back the other direction where it's like, no, we just got to be hard-nosed, arrest everyone, put them in jail. And it seems like what you're saying is there's, we don't have to keep swinging to those extremes. Maybe that we still do need some reform, but there obviously has to be some consistency in how the law is applied to address some livability issues. Am I getting close to it?
I think you put it really well. I call it trench warfare sometimes, and I think a lot of people are tired of just this trench warfare, Camp A, Camp B, swinging back and forth and just sniping at each other, when I think a lot of these issues just call for some common sense. And I think most people, even most progressives, are there in that kind of common sense camp. And I think there's a lot more agreement in these areas than people realize, because we keep getting pulled into these kind of competing visions of our partisan camps, so to speak.
Yeah. So you were at the DFL Senior Caucus debate the other night, and I was too, and I got to hear you live for the first time. A few things I was going to...
How did I do?
I really thought everyone did pretty well.
That's a very safe answer.
Well, you did. Well, I'll tell you this, after seeing you, I was like, I need to have him on the podcast.
Well, I appreciate
that. I haven't had him on the podcast. He's obviously has some good ideas. So why hasn't he come on yet? So
I'm happy to be here.
It motivated me in that way. But one of the things, you described your career as helping people often at their lowest point or most stressful point in their lives. And you also talked about standing up for consumers. So those are sort of what you've done as a litigator. How do you see your past experiences applying now for a prosecutor role?
Yeah, I think in kind of two primary ways. One, one of the problems, I think, with some of the reform project in the criminal justice area is it's very focused on the needed reforms that we need and changes to the system. But it sometimes loses sight of the fact that there are dangerous people in our community who are trying to hurt our neighbors and friends. Mm-hmm. And the primary job of the county attorney is to protect the community from the people who are here trying to or harming us intentionally or otherwise. And as we talked about at the forum with the seniors, I think that there is a really important job for the county attorney in protecting the most vulnerable people in our community. And if the county attorney doesn't do that, then people are exposed in this community to violence, to crime, to property loss, and that has all kinds of negative effects. So number one is the job of the county attorney is protecting the vulnerable from people who are going to harm them. And then number two is being experienced in standing up to people and being willing to push to do what's necessary to make sure that you are making the tough choices and being bold when necessary to advance the cause of protecting vulnerable people and increasing equality in our society.
So I want to make sure, people hear when you talk about standing up to people, you do have some experience, right? You have litigated a case before the Minnesota Supreme Court, right?
A couple, yeah.
I don't know if you want to highlight that, what that experience was like. That seems like an important part of your background.
Yeah, I'm proud of it, and I clerked on the Minnesota Supreme Court for both Justice Paul Anderson and Justice David Littlehog. It was a great honor to get to work in such an incredible institution, and I think the justices and the staff and lawyers who work there just do a phenomenal job for Minnesota. So I'm very honored that I got to play a small role in that as a clerk right after law school. And then a few years ago, we had a client who was being harassed sexually and racially through an unpaid internship at a hospital. And we sued, which is not that uncommon. That's what civil justice system is for. But the case was originally dismissed because our client fell in this gap in the law, according to the district court, where she was at a hospital, and so it wasn't part of her education because it wasn't the school, but she wasn't getting paid, and so it didn't count as employment discrimination because she was unpaid. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that can't be right. It can't be that in Minnesota, unpaid interns are completely unprotected from racial and sexual discrimination.
Yeah, it certainly seems, if to let that go, we're setting up a lot of our young people for a very bad experience.
Speaking of vulnerable people, these are people who often don't have a lot of options. They're new in their careers. They don't have the professional relationships or experience to know how to protect themselves outside of legal protections. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was wrong morally, and I thought it was wrong on substance. I thought that just can't be the way the law works in this state. And so we went to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals actually, in a split decision, sided with the district court. And we went to the Supreme Court. And that case actually changed the law by having the Supreme Court clearly say that in Minnesota, unpaid interns are protected under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. And so the bravery of that client and the work we were able to do changed the law in making sure that those people, students or unpaid interns, don't fall between that gap in Minnesota. And that was one thing I was able to do in private practice. Nice. That changed, I think, the law in the state.
That's great. And you left private practice or your law firm, I think, because of Medell, is that right? Because he was a partner there? What happened there?
Well, Chris Maddell is a good man and a friend of mine, and he has been a mentor to me, and I'm honored to have worked at that firm for about 9 years. But Operation Metro Surge is one of those times in your life where I think it underscored the importance of choosing what side we're on and how we're spending time. And it emerged that Chris had taken on some work for Jonathan Ross, and I thought everyone deserves a good lawyer, but the constitutional right to counsel and the obligation for lawyers to help their clients doesn't create an obligation for me to spend my time on that side here in this fight. And I thought it was so essential for me and my own conscience to say very clearly, at this time, I am standing with the people of Minnesota, the people in the streets, the people protecting our neighbors from the secret police that Trump sent here. And so it was hard to say goodbye to friends and lawyers that I respect, but it was also an easy decision because it just is not how I am comfortable spending my time given the challenges our community has faced.
Well, let's talk about Operation Metro Surge because that's a big issue, obviously, and they're trying to sort out who's bringing what charges, right? And I think Mary Moriarty has sued to get evidence. Do you think Hennepin County is handling that correctly right now? I mean, it seems like it's uncharted territory. What direction would you take that responsibility if you were elected?
I don't think it's going as well as it should. And I want to start with saying everything I'm hearing is that the line prosecutors, the professionals in that office are working day and night and doing everything they can. And this is not on them. These are good lawyers and they're working really hard to do everything in their power to try to get accountability for what happened here. But I don't think that it has been led in the right way. And I say this on my stump. Where are the charges? Mm-hmm. And if I was in charge, I would do a couple things as chief priorities. One, on these high-profile cases, the shootings, you have to get it right. You want to make sure that you are crossing your T's, dotting your I's, and I think that the Hennepin County and the Attorney General and the city are going through that process now, trying to get the evidence. But I would also prioritize bringing at least some charges now, because I believe our community is scared and it's hurting, and I think it's really essential to move quickly to show that elected leaders are worthy of the bravery and courage that everyday Minnesotans have shown during this time. And I personally refuse to believe that with the hundreds of eyewitnesses, hundreds or thousands of hours of footage, there isn't a single use of force case ready to charge. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we have one lesson from the past 5 years with Joe Biden and Merrick Garland, that there's a real cost to waiting for accountability. Mm-hmm. And this idea that we're just going to drag things out for years at a time and make sure we do it right actually is a bad idea. And there's real merit to moving quickly. Mm-hmm. Those prosecutions are going to face real challenges. They can be removed to federal court. There are immunity issues. There's the evidence issue. There's a bandwidth issue. But all the roadblocks out there are surmountable. And I think that if at the end of the day, the Eighth Circuit or the Roberts Supreme Court is going to come down and say, oh, federal law protects what ICE was doing here, you can't charge them at the state level, all these cases get dismissed. I think that's wrong, and it would be a bad outcome, but we should at least try. This idea that, oh, I'm not going to do something because someone might disagree with me or someone might tell me no, or I might lose. Look, work really hard, work damn hard, try to win. But I think there's real merit to having the people of Hennepin County see that you're willing to fight for them on their side. And look, those cases might get dismissed. I'm not going to promise that, but I would promise that I'm going to do everything in my power to have accountability. And I think an important part of accountability is speed.
And is Hennepin County the right level, or is this really something charges the state should be bringing? Should it be a joint state county? Because you could end up having Ramsey County bringing charges too, and what's.
I don't think there's like a black and white answer to that. And I would say, I mean, Keith is doing a great job. I know the Attorney General's office is looking at this very closely. I know John Choi in Ramsey County is looking at it very closely. And again, I know that people in Hennepin County, prosecutors are looking at this and working on it. So the exact right entity to bring those charges would have to be a collaborative conversation between those different offices to make the right choice. But I think it should be driven with this idea that we need to show people that we're acting. And
yeah, I mean, I hope they can be successful, and there some sense of justice can be had, because it's certainly not going to happen on the federal level,
which is outrageous. I mean,
yeah.
Just to pause, and this is a little outside of the Hennepin County office, but I think one of the challenges right now is like Trump is so bad. He's an incompetent president. He has sent secret police to harm the communities. I mean, he should be removed from office. He should resign in disgrace for his corruption, his incompetence, his unconstitutional actions. And sometimes we know he's not going to resign, and we know he's not going to be impeached and removed, probably. So we just kind of, in my view, give him a pass. And we're really spent a lot of time focusing on the people who kind of are on our side, and they take so much heat. And in a weird way, I almost feel like we just don't give Trump agency, or the Republicans in the U.S. Congress agency, and like they have a lot of power over this, and they have a lot of responsibility for it. And so I just don't want that to be lost in this conversation. And at the same time, we have limited tools available. I would also just add to this point of accountability. ICE is still here, and they've moved on. They're in Vermont doing outrageous things, and that's one reason I think there's real utility. It's good to show them that there are consequences, not stern letters.
Well, he's kind of like a mafia don, right? Because he's covering his tracks at this point. He's gotten rid of all the people that were involved. Bondi won't show up and testify, so like those are all going to be. Noam's out. These are all going to be dead ends that are hard to follow up. And like now he's, I don't know if it's in the Supreme Court yet or federal level, but he's challenging this idea that presidents have to keep documentation about their decisions, right? So if he can get rid of that, then he can get rid of all the paperwork or any memos or whatever. I mean, although I would think you could look at his public posts and probably make a case right there about breaking the law. But I'm going to keep it focused on you. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Trump. You did say that you believe justice must be fair, safety must be real, and the law must work for everyone and not just the powerful. So my question is, how do you define justice and safety in practice, and what does it look like in day-to-day in the office, the Hennepin County Attorney's office?
Yeah. I think safety is people being comfortable to live in their communities, fundamentally. Feeling safe in their own homes, feeling safe in their businesses, feeling comfortable having their kids, playing in the street, going to school. And a component of that is accountability. And if people feel like wrongdoers will be held responsible for what they did. And one of the reasons I wanted to run for this office is I think that it's so important for progressive communities to show that there's a successful model of progressive governance, that our cities are nice places to live, thriving communities, safe places. And I think sometimes we have lost coherence in presenting that vision to the state and the country. And it's one reason I think the prosecutor's offices right now are really important, not just for the ICE accountability and crime, which matter, but being part of that conversation that progressives can say, you put us in charge of a community and it's going to be a nice place to live. You're going to want to have a family there. You're going to want to open a business there. You're going to want to move there. And I think we have not always been successful in presenting that model. So that's safety to me.
Yeah.
Justice is first and foremost equality before the law. I think one of the foundational values of our democracy is that everyone is equal under the law. And that means the powerful have to be accountable, and it means that people who are on the margins of society shouldn't always take the brunt of the criminal justice system just because they don't have the resources, don't have the personal relationships to kind of skate around justice. And so we have to be thorough and fair in how we are applying the laws. And I think that the second component of justice beyond just equality under the law is making sure that our criminal justice system is holding wrongdoers accountable, but also giving people a path back into society, if they are going to prison, if they're going into probation, and not just churning people out into kind of a tiered system where you just kind of go into the criminal justice system and then you're never really going to be back on your feet as a member of society, either because of the stigma or just what it does to you mentally in terms of your professional options.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue to tackle, right? Like trying to figure out how to help people who have gone through the criminal justice system to get jobs and be accepted back into society. That's a tough one.
It's really tough. I mean, and I was on board with the Ban the Box movement. And that I think is a...
Can you...
Yeah,
I'm not sure what
yeah,
that
sure. And so Ban the Box is this idea that it says you can't put on like a job application or housing application a box where people check like, I don't have a criminal history, or I have never been convicted of a felony. And I think on substance in isolation, that's a really good idea, because we want to be able to allow people who have already completed their time and reintegrated in society to be able to do so. But one of the things that we have found in some places that have instituted that is that it actually hurt the ability of Black people and some other communities of color to get jobs or housing, because if the employer or the landlord couldn't know, then they just were more likely to say, well, I don't know that this Black person doesn't have a criminal history. And so their bias and the racism actually crept in and asserted itself because there wasn't transparency. And I think that's such a...
So they would just assume or say, I'm not going to take a risk since I don't know.
Exactly. And so it's an example of unintended consequences of a well-intentioned reform. I think something that's right on the substance, but has these effects that aren't fully predicted. And so I think it's unsettling and it's troublesome, and it's, I think, an interesting example of how we need to be really thoughtful and strategic and how we're confronting bias and racism in society, which is very present. And some of these mechanical solutions sometimes don't work. And that's why it's another reason I talk about how there isn't just something we can go back to. We have to continue innovating and trying to find new paths to reduce inequities in our society.
Well, sort of a follow-up to that, one of the things that Moriarty kind of got famous for, one of the many, is this idea that on a low-level traffic stop, they can't morph into a felony charge, right?
Yeah.
Is that a good idea or a bad idea? What's your thinking on that?
I think it's a bad idea, but I think it's been implemented successfully in Ramsey County. So to me, I am not coming in saying absolutely not, but I think it's a real mistake to tie the hands of law enforcement to be able to respond to bad actors in our society. Again, part of the job of that office is setting policy around protecting our community from people who are here to hurt us. And I think that even more than whether that policy is a good idea or a bad idea, it's an example of how Mary has not been effective in practice, because John Choi in Ramsey County rolled out that policy almost the same and faced some blowback, but he was able to get his police and law enforcement in Ramsey County on board. So a year later, 2 years later, they're saying this was a good policy because now officers are responding more to violent crime and less to kind of some of these petty traffic violations, and it frees up law enforcement resources. Few problems in Hennepin County. She announced it without giving any heads up to law enforcement. So there's tremendous blowback. They right away face questions like, well, what if they pull over someone for expired tabs and they find 5 pounds of cocaine in the car or an illegal machine gun? Are you really saying that you're not going to prosecute someone for doing very dangerous activities just because they were pulled over on a moving violation? And then Mary's office said, well, no, like there are exceptions to this. Like, okay, what? What are they? These are the things that you should think through before you announce a policy so that you're ready with a response. And it's one reason why it's good to have law enforcement on board. Another problem is that the Hennepin County Attorney is not the super chief of police over all the police departments in Hennepin County. Those are independent agencies. If they want to still pull people over for a moving violation, they can and they will, even if there's not going to be a felony prosecution from it. And so, yes, they might be less likely to do it because they know it's not going to be charged out at the county level, but if you do it without any coordination or buy-in from law enforcement, you might not actually be helping the people that you're trying to help. And so there are so many problems in that one policy and that one rollout that wasn't done effectively. And I think we have a model right across the river in Ramsey County that was more effective. And so I would listen to the law enforcement actors. I would listen to community members. And I'm not a hard yes or no on that policy, but I think it's a real microcosm of how even well-intentioned reforms can completely misfire and break apart the coalition that we need to keep improving our society.
Well, what you just said highlights, I think, one of the biggest criticisms around Moriarty in the current office has created some antagonism with the various police chiefs, right, and officers. There's 34 different police chiefs in Hennepin County, which, that's maybe another debate. Like, is that too many? That's a lot. But my question is, Roy, how do you go about gaining back their trust? Because I think part of why she got elected was that at that time period, people really wanted somebody who wasn't going to be afraid to basically arrest bad cops and hold them accountable. And I think people still want that, but it's also created a real tension between the officers and the office, and they need to work together in order to, bring charges. So how do you think you go about doing the repair, or maybe you don't even think it's necessary? I'm not sure. So
it's absolutely necessary, and it's another reason I wanted to run, because I think that work is really important for public safety, and also just on a human level. I have tremendous respect and admiration for the law enforcement officers in the state, and it really breaks my heart, the people that I've spoken with who are going into a line of work, driving out into the middle of the night. They pull over a car, they don't know what they're going to meet, their family's at home, and they're doing that to protect us and keep us safe. And I think that is admirable. That's a good thing, and we want it in our community. And I think that it's counterproductive, and it's frankly just sad that so many of them feel attacked and feel like elected officials don't have their back. And I think, if I had a kid and they wanted to be a cop, I'd be proud of them. I think it's a good line of work. And so I really just care about the law enforcement officers in the county as justice partners to keep us safe, and just human beings and public servants who are doing good work. I think that getting back to having trust and mutual respect starts with just talking to them. And the traffic policy was one example. Just picking up the phone and being a human being in talking to these people. And they might disagree with you. Some of them might leak information and piss you off because they have a policy disagreement with you. That doesn't mean you can just isolate yourself when your job is building the coalition and being one of the conveners for criminal justice in Hennepin County. So I think, one, treating them with respect, thanking them for the work that they're doing, talking with them and listening to them is where it starts. And then I think this idea that they feel like there's a target on their back, and if they are making tough judgment calls, elected officials are going to, run for the hills and not have their back. And I think that's really devastating. And I think we should just be really clear that when a cop is doing the right stuff and trying to keep us safe, we're supporting them. But if they violate the law, they will be held accountable just like everyone else. Mm-hmm. Again, everyone's equal before the law. It's a fundamental tenet of our democracy. And that's one reason, as I said at the debate, I think it's actually a lot more simple than sometimes it is made out to be by these competing camps.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to something you said at the beginning about the office being able to sort of use its voice. I think what people have reacted to a certain extent with Moriarty is it's felt not, it's felt in some of her words that the law wasn't going to be even-handed. It was going to be aggressive about finding mistakes that cops had made. And whether she's gone about doing that, I'm not quite sure, but at least that's the attitude that was projected. One other thing I want to ask about that people are always bring up when talking about this office is youth crime, and particularly it was brought up in that debate, like some of the clearance rates are terrible. And recently it's been, it feels like it's been going on for years, but there's been a spat of car theft. So how would your charging philosophy be different from, other people in this office in terms of youth comes in, how do you handle them? Is it automatic diversion, or is there other programs that you would be looking to put them in, or what's your philosophy on it?
Yeah, a lot of questions in there. I'll start with the clearance rates.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. And clearance rates, and for people who don't know, clearance rate is just a reference to essentially the percentage of crimes that are committed that are charged out, where they find a suspect and the office is able to prosecute that person.
And it's so interesting because people have vastly different ideas of the clearance rate, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think it was mentioned that 1% of the car thefts are cleared. But if a lot of people you talk to feel like people are getting arrested and charged left and right for these crimes, and that's not happening. And so
it's just not true.
It's just not true. But I think that's one of those things. And this is where I certainly respected Moriarty's position that, like, I want to follow the data. I want to do, policies based on what's effective, what's the data telling us. But right now, the data in terms of clearance rates is saying there's a lot of crimes that aren't being prosecuted.
And so clearance rates, I think, are important because they underscore how the debate around criminal justice reform kind of gets shifted sometimes, because there's this idea that communities of color, communities who are less powerful in our society, people on the margins, are facing the brunt of policing and police misconduct. But at the same time, these communities, poor communities and communities of color, face more crime in their neighborhoods. And so when you talk about low clearance rates, the people who are bearing the brunt of these unsolved crimes tend to be the people, black communities and poorer communities. And so solving crime and holding criminals accountable, I believe, is actually something for justice in our society, and it's for protecting the vulnerable people who just want to go about their day and they don't want their car vandalized or their business broken into or their kid stepping on a needle. So clearance rates are really important just for justice, I believe. It's also the case that we are really understaffed in the Minneapolis Police Department. And one of the best things you could do to improve clearance rates would be having enough staff in law enforcement roles. The statistics show that the first 24 hours of crime matter a lot in terms of finding physical evidence, finding eyewitnesses, and you just want to make sure that you have enough people to act quickly and investigate crimes. And that goes to what we were talking about a minute ago of treating law enforcement with enough respect that people want to be cops here. And I think that's really important for clearance rates. As it goes to youth and charging decisions, which is another part of your question, I think this is one thing that Mary's gotten right. I mean, she has really done a good job of finding ways to get youth out of recidivism and into diversion. I think where it is falling down is in holding people accountable who are repeat offenders or violent offenders. And I think that we just have to really use judgment when you're seeing someone come in who's committed a crime. First time around is a very different thing than if they are repeat offenders. And I think certainly when there's a violent aspect to it, I think we have to really step into our role of protecting the people who are victims of crime rather than the people who are perpetrators. And we treat the perpetrators, with the justice that they deserve, meaning they're entitled to a lawyer, they're entitled to a strong defense, they're entitled to appellate review. We want to make sure that if they enter the criminal justice system, that they are being treated in a way that the underlying mental health conditions can be addressed, that they are receiving education so they can be productive. But it is unacceptable the rate of car thefts and vandalism. I mean, so many people in this city just are sick and tired of having their cars broken into. And I think that when I talk about having progressive cities be nice places to live, look, I care about people on the margins of our society. I care about people who are living in the encampments. I care about youth who make some mistakes and break into some cars. But I care about everyone, and that includes the people who are living down the street on Nicollet Avenue here who keep having their cars broken into. And I think we just need to do a more serious job about protecting them from the crime that is a real quality of life issue in our communities.
Yeah, it's a broader subject, but I think you're right about it's a weakness, I guess, for Democrats, that this idea that they are not keeping law and order, right? And it's something that Republicans keep bashing away at them on, and I think it's created this weird dynamic where Democrats are afraid to be out front about what is going to result in a punishment and what is going to be treated as in a different way. But having livability as a top issue and how it relates to law and order is really important, I think, to future Democratic success.
I agree completely, just to cut in, but I think it's really important.
I'm really just repeating what you said, I hope.
Turns out I agree with myself. But I agree. I say this as I go out in the community on this campaign. If progressive cities are not safe, thriving communities, it puts the whole project of progress at risk, right? Mm-hmm. Because we open up ourselves to these attacks, and you see it in states and cities, and I think sometimes in the national election, where some of these failures in criminal justice and livability in democratically controlled cities and states get pointed out. And it means some people don't want to trust us with running, their communities or their states. And I think that if we are serious about presenting a cohesive progressive vision for America, for Minnesota, for Hennepin County, for Minneapolis, we need to be really serious about saying progressive cities are going to be great places to live. Mm-hmm. And it's very straightforward, I think.
So I have two final questions for you. One is, I think you question the policy of taking race into consideration in charging, if I have that right. So yes. Could you just describe what's your position on that? How is the current process incorrect, or how would you change it?
I don't think race should play any role in a charging or sentencing decision, period. And I think there's a lot of bias, there's racism in our society, there's all kinds of inequities. You have to address them, but you do it through, having adjusting policing methods. You do it through school systems and making sure that you're moving people from school into society and not from school into prison. There are lots of ways to address it. But again, I really fundamentally believe that one of the core values in a constitutional republic society like ours is that everyone's equal before the law. And so if you start peeking behind I'm thinking of like the justice is blind, they say, and if you start peeking behind that and meting out justice differently based on who the person is, that is a road we do not want to go down, and I think it's offensive to our core values.
Okay. And I assume this, and obviously I saw you at the DFL Senior Caucus, but you're running for the DFL endorsement.
I am, yeah.
Yep.
I'm a proud Democrat, a lifelong Democrat. Absolutely, yeah.
And I think your resume, which we didn't talk about, you've done a lot of work for Democratic candidates, correct?
I've done a lot of work. I worked for Paul Wellstone. I worked for Mark Dayton. I worked for Barack Obama and for Hillary Clinton on their presidential campaigns. I have spent my life working to support progressive candidates and causes. And I was very honored to be the 2018 DFL endorsed candidate for Attorney General. I absolutely am a proud Democrat.
Great. Well, are there any topics that you wanted to cover today that we haven't gone over? We've certainly covered a lot, but I want to make sure that if there's any other messages you wanted listeners to hear, that you got it out there.
I think I hear all over our county that people are ready for common sense. And we talked about it at the beginning of this interview, but this idea that people are pulled apart and there's this partisan warfare and trench warfare and the pendulum swinging. And I think people just want elected officials that are going to be honest with them and work hard and just use some common sense to find those areas where there's a lot of agreement. And we need elected leaders that are going to push us towards consensus and not just be more flamethrowers. And I can say that and believe that as a very progressive person, but I believe that it's time to build bridges in our society.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me. I guess
thanks so much for the opportunity.
I'll see you in June, I think, is when the convention is.
June 13th, are you going to be there?
Okay. I'm hoping to, yes.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much.
Bye.